Hello, Vinya. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll present you very quickly. I had to select a few things, a few achievements from your immense list of achievements and things that you have done in your life. So I had to select a few. Dr. Vinya Ariyaratne is a physician by training and a board-certified specialist in community medicine. He started his career as an intern medical officer at a government hospital in Sri Lanka. He then joined the Faculty of Medical Sciences of a university as a lecturer in community medicine. After serving in the academia for 5 years, he decided to join the voluntary non-government development sector with which he had had a lifelong association. In July 2000, he became the executive director of Sarvodaya, the position he held up until December 2010. And as the executive director of Sarvodaya, he was responsible for the implementation of the island-wide integrated community health and development programs through a network of over 50 district centers and training institutions with a full-time staff of over 800 people. He developed numerous innovative community health programs working closely with the government sector, universities, professional colleges, as well as other civil society organizations. He has been extensively involved in health and development programs related to the war affected communities in Sri Lanka. In the early 1990s, at the height of the separatist war in Sri Lanka, he initiated a novel program to address the psychosocial effects amongst children affected by the war. And this program, which was adopted as a community-based and non-medicalized approach to healing, helped thousands of children belonging to all ethnic groups to recover from the trauma of war. Dr. Vinya also has extensive experience in working with governmental bodies, UN agencies, and multilateral agencies such as the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, but also the private sector in matters relating to national development and policies. And in 2014, you received the Social Entrepreneur of the Year award from the Schwab Foundation World Economic Forum. And currently, you are the General Secretary of the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement, which is Sri Lanka's largest non-governmental grassroots development organization. You also serve as the Director General of the newly established Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning and as a board member of Sarvodaya Development Finance, the economic empowerment arm of the Sarvodaya movement. And we will touch upon these different things in the interview, in the upcoming interview. So again, thank you so much for being with us. And just one question to start it off was that trigger in 2000 when you switched, when you had a successful and extensive academic training, started your career in academia and medical practice. And then in 2000, you decided to switch to Sarvodaya and more non-governmental development work. What triggered actually that shift?
Yeah. Thank you, Mark, and thank you for inviting me for this interview. So 2000 was a very important year for me personally, and as you all know, the new millennium also started in 2000, and I had just completed 5 years as an academic in a newly established medical school in Sri Lanka. It's a state medical school. We don't have any private universities in Sri
Mhm.
Lanka. So I have gained a lot of experience since my childhood on the social and economic conditions of the people of Sri Lanka. And when I studied medicine, I always wanted to go into public health. So even though I was an academic in a medical school, my subject area was community medicine or public health. So I was a lecturer in community medicine. So the subject of community medicine is really looking at the community or the society as a whole, and it try to address the what we call the determinants of health. Of course, there is also a service delivery part, clinical services, preventive services, but largely looking at how you can make a community healthy, or how to keep a community healthy, and how you can detect illnesses or diseases well in advance so that you can take preventive measures. So the focus was in preventive medicine. And then there was kind of a change in the evolution of Sarvodaya in the late 1990s, where the senior founder generation was handing over responsibilities to the new generation, and there was a lot of enthusiasm amongst the second generation in taking up responsibilities, bigger responsibilities, while the seniors and the elders guiding the movement. So I was able to really, although I was working in the university, being part of the movement, and I grew up with the movement because my father is the founder of the movement, it gave me an opportunity to really look at some of the different dynamics operating in Sri Lanka in relation to people's health. So then, because of this need, and I also could use my academic experience, and also just leaving the university doesn't mean that you have to give up your academic career as such. So I continued being engaged with the universities in Sri Lanka, both local and international. So I didn't feel that I was really leaving a lucrative job and making a huge sacrifice, to be honest, because I think that even though I do non-profit charity sector work, it also has a lot of value in what we do. A lot of professionalism is also there. And then I saw that there's much more freedom to do something more impactful in the community. So I had no hesitation. So I thought that was the right time for me. I was in my late 30s. So I thought that, if I make this change now, I should be able to work with my peers who are in the same generation, coming from different backgrounds, working with some of the senior workers who came from villages, who had enormous experience in community development, community mobilization. So I thought it will be a good opportunity for me to do something beyond what I was doing in the university. So that prompted me to take that decision, and I never regret that decision of starting to work full time in the non-governmental development sector.
That's amazing. And what a story then unfolded with everything you've done in that sector, actually. And that was something that I was curious about also. Now that you might look back a little bit from that trigger on and from all the work you've done since then in that field, is
Yes.
there some kind of particular memory, if I just tell you like that, or some kind of, or different memories that stand out to you the most of something that you have done or something you have lived throughout that experience, and why is it so, you think, memorable?
You are referring to the university experience, right?
Yeah, from the whole non-governmental work that you have started from 2000 on.
Okay, sorry. Yes. So from 2000 onwards, of course, I was the executive director of Sarvodaya, and it was a very big responsibility. Our country was still having the war, the internal armed conflict, which was taking a huge toll on the lives of people and the livelihoods of people. And I had a very close relationship with Sarvodaya, even though when I was working in the university in addressing some of the needs of displaced communities, particularly children. So it was a big challenging task for me to take on that responsibility of a huge organization, Sri Lanka's largest development organization, a social movement, and also with a big staff and a huge volunteer force. So the memorable, if you look at the period from 2000 to 2010, there were, I think, three important developments which impacted the civil society or the non-government sector. One was the Asian tsunami. As you know, we were one of the countries worst hit by the tsunami in 2004 December, and it was a new experience for me. But because I had been also trained as a public health specialist, and then working with other kinds of disasters in Sri Lanka, and Sarvodaya being an organization from the 1960s, being involved in disaster management work and also in preparing the communities for facing different types of disasters. Then, of course, the man-made or human-induced disaster of the war. So all these times of disasters, we were the first responders with the village people. So 2004 tsunami and the recovery was very, very critical for the future developments that happened, even in relation to the war. So we were able to mount the biggest civil society response to tsunami in terms of money, more than 15 million US dollars, in terms of outreach to the community, I'm sure we would have benefited more than 300,000 people who were affected by the tsunami. We built more than 300 houses around the country in the districts, the coastal districts which were affected by the tsunami. So that was one most memorable events that happened in not just during that period, but in my lifetime. Then secondly, it was the war, and the third was the end of the war and what happened since then. So when you look at the war, there was a brief period of a ceasefire between 2002 and 2005. So during that period, we were able to uh, again go to the areas which were affected by the war, even though Sarvodaya, the local Sarvodaya staff and the volunteers continued to operate even during the war. We didn't have access because it was controlled by the rebel group, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. And so during the ceasefire time, even though there was no full resolution of the conflict in Sri Lanka, we were able to go and reconnect with the people in the north and the east. So that was a very memorable experience where we were really working with the affected people, the displaced people, providing them with whatever the basic, satisfying the basic needs of these communities, mobilizing volunteers, mobilizing other in-kind donations. And so it was a massive program that we were able to do during the period of the ceasefire. Then there were, of course, political changes, and in 2005, the war started again. And in 2009, May, the war came to an end. And then we had to also help the people who were then displaced. More than 300,000 people were displaced at that time. And we were helping the government and working with other non-governmental organizations, the other NGOs, the civil humanitarian organizations, both local and international, very closely working with the UN system, trying to provide the basic needs, meet the basic needs of the people who are displaced. Then the entire process of resettling them back in their own places of residence, and it was a memorable experience. So that whole decade, after 5 years of academic work coming to the non-government sector, those were the three most memorable events in my life.
That's incredible. What a start in the non-governmental organization industry with these three memorable events. And I know also now we everyone a bit in the world has been going through that crisis, a little bit of economic crisis, health crisis, even mental health crisis. And you, within these experiences that you just mentioned, and I'm sure also in other events, you have really seen people in deep crisis, in wars, in other kinds of crisis, political crisis. And I was just very wondering, how did you see people in these different moments? What did you learn about people in these moments, and that we maybe could learn right now to overcome that crisis that we all face?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. So, my biggest learning is that the people themselves have enormous potential, the resilience of people. I mean, you can't imagine how these people faced such atrocious situations, which were really life threatening. Their basic survival was threatened, and how they could still keep the hope alive. All we have to do is to help them to keep their hope alive. I think as a humanitarian organization, as a development organization, we did that. It's not just providing them with supplies of food or medicines or water or whatever, other physical needs, but it's really addressing their psychosocial needs, being with them, sharing their own pain with all of us, and then how we can really have empathy to understand their situation, work together. And we had the advantage, and even myself, we were very much a locally positioned organization. So they saw the Sarvodaya movement and our work as integral to their own communities. And most communities were, before the war, connected to Sarvodaya in different ways. So we didn't have to really reintroduce what Sarvodaya is going to do after the war ended or during the war. So we were able to keep that connection. So number one is that you be part of them, that you have a situation, you create a situation where the relationships are equal. There is no power dynamics that will look at them as recipients of aid. uh, we can't have a condescending attitude towards them. Treat them as human beings with dignity. I think that's so important. What they need first is recognition of them as equal human beings like all of us, and have dignity. Then you can have a relationship to understand their problems, and then do whatever you can within your own means, or mobilizing the resources from other people in addressing the problems that they were facing, and together engage in a recovery process. So that's my answer to your question, Mark.
This is amazing, extremely powerful. I hope that people that are listening to this interview will take some things away, because it's, I think, very very can be life changing for people, especially this power dynamic that is reversed, or at least not existent. That you actually see them with dignity, and everything they represent. And something that I think goes into that very well is your involvement in the education of future leaders in Sri Lanka that you are having at the moment, or right now, or you've always been a bit in there. And from your experience working with these different governmental bodies, the UN, the World Bank, and other important organizations, and probably also meeting a lot of upcoming leaders, or a lot of leaders from the world right now, what kind of advice could you give, maybe more on the institutional level or the structural level, to upcoming leaders who want to create institutions to maximize their impact on the world?
I think creating leaders is the biggest challenge that we are facing during our lifetime now, particularly even in the wake of the COVID-19 challenge now. So, Sarvodaya movement, the movement that I belong to, have always recognized the potential of leaders, whether they are coming from very humble backgrounds, without formal education, without the comforts of living in a uh, even a middle class socio-economic environment. We see young people, in particular women, and even people who are with having special needs like differently able people. Everyone has potential, but everyone can't be a leader. We know that some have to be just followers,
Mhm.
right? But you see from your work the leaders emerging. So in our work, we never sort of try to have a formal mechanism in selecting leaders to be groomed to take responsibilities in development work. It was a very organic process. We organize a community activity. It may be to construct a road for the village. It may be to set up a preschool. You see, naturally, leaders, some people taking bigger responsibility and showing the way to the others. So those are organic leaders. So what we did was, we had a mechanism. Once we identify such leaders, we engage with them a little bit in a more formal way, and then offer them some structured exposure to further their knowledge, develop their skills, and also the attitude towards serving the community. So that has been very, very effective in the organization. From the very beginning, we called it development education, not just leadership training as such. Development education is more holistic. So they'll be coming to sometimes few days training, or 2 weeks leadership training, or sometimes spend 3 months in a institution. But it's not just institution, they'll be visiting villages and doing a lot of field work. So we have evolved many training programs for potential leaders, including preschool teachers and community mobilizers, volunteer health workers, and also for helping the community to develop enterprises for income generating projects. So in a vast area of development, we have facilitated development of leaders, and now it is much more institutionalized in the form of Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning.
Yeah, could you talk a bit more maybe about the Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning? Because I think it's extremely interesting and it's also very much linked to Home for Humanity. And I think you're doing amazing work with local communities there. And it would be great to tell us a bit more about its approach, what it's doing, focusing on right now, and how do you think it can really become a catalyst for societal change?
So, Sarvodaya movement was founded in 1958, 62 years ago. So, for the first 4 5 decades, the development work itself has been around education, development education at all levels, getting the people to understand that their situation can be changed, even they are poverty stricken. There is potential in every human being, there's potential in every family, there's potential in every community. There are a lot of resources, natural resources, and the power of your mind and your arms, you can do something to change your situation. So the development education, as I mentioned earlier, evolved in the 60s, 70s with hundreds and thousands of young people being trained in different ways to play certain catalyst role in their own communities. And then the movement evolved to become the largest development organization and going into even very sophisticated fields such as information communication technology and enterprise development, banking, village banking. So then you needed people with higher skills, higher knowledge, not necessarily formal university education.
Mhm.
So we were constantly, through our educational programs, formalizing or professionalizing these activities. Then when we celebrated the Sarvodaya 50th anniversary in 2008, we look back. Okay, now we have come half a century, a long journey. Where is Sri Lanka now? Where is the world now? Then we thought, okay, now some of the services that we have been providing are now being provided by the government itself, by the local government agencies, because it was not the same Sri Lanka that we were in 2008 when Sarvodaya started 50 years earlier. Sri Lanka, which was a low income country, had become a middle income country by the time we celebrated our 50th anniversary. Then we have to look at, while keeping the holistic vision of Sarvodaya of a complete social transformation, economic transformation, what should be our key area, should be our niche in terms of while doing other things, we recognize that learning, really community learning, education is so vitally important to build a peaceful and prosperous Sri Lanka and a new world. So it was because with that realization that we started formally the Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning, SIHL. And the idea was we already had development education programs and also certain institutions, centers designated as development education institutes. We had farms. It's the learning is not just in a classroom, but engaging with communities. Then we were trying out indigenous farming practices, non-chemical agriculture, use of certain advanced technology that is appropriate to village communities. So that education process needed to be much more structured and cohesive. So we thought that by setting up a institution which follows a different model, we call it the Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning. Now, higher means not higher in terms of the degrees, masters or PhD, and that kind of higher. Higher means deeper. It's at a higher mental plane that you realize your own potential. You bring in spiritual values, you bring ecology into these other forms of scientific knowledge from other countries which can be also applied to the local community. Then there's indigenous knowledge, tacit knowledge, intangible knowledge. How do you collect them, and then how do you harmoniously integrate them in development work? So that was the start of the Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning. And for 10 years, up until 2018, when we celebrated the 60th year of Sarvodaya, 60th anniversary of Sarvodaya, we had conducted so many learning programs. We don't call them courses as such, although we had conducted some very formal courses like in child protection, certificate courses, diploma courses in collaboration with other recognized academic institutions in Sri Lanka. We have trained village level Sarvodaya society officials, leaders who are really the frontline workers of social change in our movement. Then we have exposed school students into environmental, ecological activities, what development is all about. Then we are also having meditation programs for pregnant mothers and newly married couples, to prisoners, to corporate sector. So that is also part of that education process. So SIHL, or the Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning, is a network of institutions connecting also to the grassroots villages, where the knowledge is applied in a very practical way to uplift the well-being of communities. And in the process, we get the individuals also to awaken themselves. So that is the internal education realization part. So it's a very unique model, and it keeps on evolving. So since 2018, we have been working on really in a much more integrated module of uh, training young people to face the new challenges that we are facing in the world. And then, of course, in 2020, the COVID-19 also posed as a big challenge, and now we are in the process of adapting to the new challenges and finding new responses. So even the SIHL's education program is now influenced or affected by the COVID-19 response, and we hope that we'll be able to uh, continue in our journey in defining the education work that we are doing through the SIHL, connecting with local institutions as well as Home for Humanity and Transform, and so many other universities that we are connected as a movement from Sri Lanka.
That's amazing. I must say, I'm a very big fan of what SIHL has done and how it has evolved over time. And I think such a perspective of a holistic education, also from within, as you said, higher learning, is something that I think everyone would need. And in Switzerland, especially, I haven't really seen something that is doing the same thing. And yeah, so this really inspires me a lot, and also inspires me to think about ways maybe that I could develop something like that in a similar fashion. But I was also very interested by the adoption of people of this kind of new curriculum, because I know also from the university world, also maybe from the Western world, that many people want to focus on a very specialized curriculum, that many universities, researchers, and so on really prone the fact that they're very specialized and very going into one direction, specific direction. Otherwise, they wouldn't be successful in their academic career. But you follow really a different approach, this very holistic one, this very polymathic approach, which I think it is amazing. But did you find some kind of problems in dealing with universities, higher other learning institutions, even the government, or even the wider adoption of people of this kind of program?
Yes, actually, it has not been easy, and still we are facing a lot of challenges. The main challenge is that when you look at education system in Sri Lanka, and probably it applies to other parts of the world as well, they see it as formal education where you uh, pass examinations and get a qualification and find a job. Very straightforward, in one box. But here our vision is completely different. It's social transformation, economic transformation, and being in harmony with nature, renewable energy, spiritual values, all that. And then when you do short-term exchanges or exposures for potential leaders, they are still stuck in that traditional mindset of getting a qualification, getting a certificate. So it's not easy to change that. And also, you still need to be recognized, that you are, whatever you do, there has to be a piece of paper saying that you have followed this course and things like that. So we were trying to balance. Now, in order for us to be eligible to issue formal certificates, which are then recognized by the system, by an employer, you need to get government accreditation. Now, the government accreditation method is very traditional. And so we, on one hand, our, say, the government accreditation will see the student to lecturer ratio. What are the computer facilities you have? How sophisticated is your computer facility or the library? Now, our learning is that when you enter the Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Learning, from the time you enter, the trees around and the flora and fauna, the animals you see are part of the learning. Now, where do you capture that in the curriculum, right? So, so we face that challenge. So we are working on, I would not say that it's a hybrid model, but I would say that it's a model where we to the minimum requirements we comply, but we build or not build on that, but parallelly we have a model where which is very much holistic and integrated. Then we also needed to look at, when you look at the recognition, now we are already working very formally with international universities. Those universities are like even the Stanford University, Wisconsin University in United States, and also the other European and Japanese universities. They send their students for exposure in Sri Lanka to various programs, and it's a huge learning for them. And we have been hosting them. Now, for them to be also offer what they call credit courses, the hosting institution has to be an academic institution, right? Now we have overcome that barrier also, because we are, though the bulk of the learning is in the community, the whole process is facilitated by qualified individuals, right? So we have identified professionals who are able to, have the orientation, but also they are very skilled to be able to deliver that part of the process, educational process. So it's a balance, and we are hoping that someday this new model will be even recognized by the formal authorities as an effective educational process.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much for the answer. I think we could definitely go on for hours on this topic, but I also wanted to address the topic of home, because in the context of Home for Humanity, where you've been a few times, you know that the symbol of home is extremely important, and we know you also share the same feeling with Sarvodaya and everything you've done. But could you bring us maybe to your childhood home, and give us some insights as to how it was to grow up in your childhood home, also with your father that was very much present in these non-governmental organizations and movements, and how was it to grow up in a true like home for humanity, as we could call it?
Our home, my parents, who were, of course, the founders of the movement. My father was a teacher in a high school in Colombo when he started. Then I was born 4 years after he started the movement. So from our childhood, we were part of this groundbreaking movement, social movement in Sri Lanka. So our home was an open home. I mean, initially it was the two elder children who were there, and then later 4 others joined. So we were a large family, 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls, then my parents, grandparents, So it was a journey that was very much rooted in the community and the Sri Lankan values, the Buddhist values. So our home, initially, the home where we were staying was in Colombo in a rented house where my father started his teaching career in Colombo in this high school then. So for 10 long years, we were there in that house in Colombo. Then uh, a, a philanthropist donated a house, an abandoned ancestral house in a place called Moratuwa, where our headquarters is now. A very old house, about 150 years old house, which was not used at that time. And so we came to that house, and then it was called Metmadura. Today it is the Sarvodaya Museum. If you visit, you will see the museum. And we started living there while I was still schooling. So it became our home and also the national and international office of Sarvodaya, starting very small, but it had more than probably 150 people living in this 2-acre land with few very basic facilities. It was community living with hostels, and everyone gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we have a family gathering, and then everybody do a lot of manual work before breakfast, and you have breakfast, and then people engage in various development work and training and all that kind of stuff. So I grew up with that. So the same tradition continues up to this date, where even though we are now married and moved out of our parents' homes, that home environment still is retained in our own homes, including my parents' homes, which is still a community home, a community facility where people just drop in and talk to my parents, who are now my father is 90 and my mother is in early 80s. So the exposure we got in terms of human values and caring for others, sharing whatever you have, not aiming for luxury, all those things came from that home environment. So I think having a home that serves humanity is so vitally important, and I think it definitely influenced what I am doing now and who I am now and what I am planning to do in the future as well.
That's beautiful, and also probably Sarvodaya became a home by itself for its staff, for its community members, for its students. And I don't know, are there some aspects, you maybe already mentioned a few, but that you took from your home for humanity in which you grew up, your parents' home, your family's home, and that you took some aspects and applied them to Sarvodaya and maybe the Higher Learning Institute? What kind of things come to your mind when you think of the parallels on both homes actually that you created?
Yeah, I think it's now I visited Home for Humanity with Alexander and Rama. It's a shared facility. I mean, it's a lot of compassion in there, and then you get, it's an open house where people come, and then there's also a lot of learning and reflection, spirituality. So all those elements were very, very common to what we have been practicing. But in the case of Home for Humanity, I think there was more, I would say that intense, I wouldn't say academic orientation, but real intense investigative, reflective learning is much more there than what we do here. And of course, the size of our scale of our operation sometimes have its own limitations, advantages, disadvantages, and the mix of cultures, I think, is also very important and unique, because we also have a lot of mix of local cultures, but in Home of Humanity you get mix of international cultures. So that way I think that we have a lot to learn from each other, and we should continue that learning process and then be connected to this thing internationally.
I absolutely agree. And just maybe I know we're going through the end of the interview, but as a last question, now that we are back a bit in the Home for Humanity environment, how do you envision Home for Humanity or its future role to be, now that you've seen it, experienced it, and also experienced your own homes? How would you envision it to be?
Well, I think it has to be I mean, if you start with common challenges now, COVID-19 is definitely having a big impact around the world. So as far as we are concerned, our response is right. It's a big wake up call. And we are also on one hand seeing a lot of positive things, even though this has disrupted lives and had a huge social and economic impact. I think this was a wake up call. It was a reminder that, people, you just can't, uh, go on like this, not business as usual. We have to change our lifestyle, stay starting from our own selves, right? How to bring back humanity, how to be sharing, how to connect with the nature, how not to have huge expectations. So that I think that itself, that what are our expectations itself, we need to really revisit, right? It's not a crisis to be opportunistic and position ourselves for our own organization. No, I think it's a challenge for all of us at an individual personal level as well. I myself, it has been still a continuing journey. It hasn't been easy at all. And the challenges that we are facing, and some challenges I really don't know how we can face effectively. Honestly, we don't know. So I think it's the continuous learning process. Be humble and create the space. So Home for Humanity has created a space for dialogue, space for innovation, space for creating something new. I think that has to continue. How it should be in terms of, in 10 years time, how it physically looks like, even for Sarvodaya, I really don't know. But what we can say is that these principles should be ingrained. I would like sustainability to be at the heart of it. Still, I would like spiritual dimension to be at the heart of it. I would like empathy to be part of it. I would like the best of science to be uh, uh, a part of it. I would like the indigenous knowledge to be a part of it. I would like the diversity of religions and ethnicities all to be an asset and a resource in a place like that. So those are the things that come to my mind. Not so much a structured. I can't imagine a structured, institution as such, but more like an organic evolution of spaces for learning, connected very closely with each other, learning from each other. And that is probably what I would envisage as the future for both Sarvodaya movement, which is also a home for everyone, as you said. And we are actually Sarvodaya, we call a Sarvodaya family. We call each other brother, sister, and even use the same language, like brother so and so, brother, sister so and so, like. So that family environment, the family spirit has to be there. So Home for Humanity has that and offered it and gifted it to the world. And I think that those are one of the rare hopes that we have for the world. And so let's keep the hopes up for everybody and work towards a different world. I think that's our wish.
That is wonderful. What an enriching way to conclude this interview. Thank you very much, Dr. Vinya, for everything you've explained, every perspective you've shared, and also everything you've done until now in your life. And I know it's far from being over. And yeah, thank you very much, Vinya.
Thank you for giving this opportunity, and thank you for the interview, Mark. And it was very well conducted. And looking forward to continuing in this journey together with Home for Humanity and all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.